The scorching July sun beat down on Willow Oak's face as she stared at the still bleeding gash on her hand, the price of her escape from the Blackwater Saloon and its proprietor's wandering hands. It was 1878, and in the harsh Arizona territory, a woman alone might as well paint a target on her back. "Miss, you need to wrap that before it gets infected." The deep voice startled her, and Willow spun around to face a tall stranger, his features obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. Dust clung to his denim pants and the leather chaps protecting them, while a revolver sat comfortably at his hip. Willow clutched her bleeding hand tighter. "I don't need help from a stranger, Xavier Galloway." He tipped his hat. "Now we ain't strangers." Willow assessed him with narrowed eyes. At 22, she'd learned that men offering help usually wanted something in return. "Willow Oak," she finally replied, the name feeling strange on her tongue after months of using a false one, "and I can manage just fine." Xavier dismounted from his chestnut stallion with practiced ease, his movements fluid despite his imposing frame. He approached slowly, hands visible, as if she were a spooked mare. At perhaps 26, his face was already weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes remained sharp beneath his hat brim. "That cut needs tending," he insisted, removing a canteen and a clean handkerchief from his saddlebag. "May I?" Reluctantly, Willow extended her hand. The gash ran diagonally across her palm, the result of grabbing a broken bottle when the saloon keeper had cornered her. Xavier's calloused fingers were surprisingly gentle as he poured water over the wound and wrapped it carefully with the cloth. "You're running from something," he observed, tying off the makeshift bandage. Willow pulled her hand back. "Aren't we all?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Suppose so. You headed somewhere specific or just away?" "West," she said simply. "Somewhere new, somewhere I can start over." Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm headed to Copper Canyon. Stage stop there needs help, and I aim to winter over before moving on in spring. You're welcome to ride with me, safer than traveling alone." Willow considered the offer. Her stolen horse was exhausted, her supplies dwindling, and the territory between here and California was unforgiving. Still, she hesitated. "I don't have money to pay you for escort." Xavier shook his head, not asking for payment, just offering company on a lonely road. "Why would you help me?" His eyes met hers, earnest and clear. "Because out here you help folks when you can. Tomorrow it might be me needing the assistance." Willow studied him. His clothes were worn but clean, his gear well maintained. The gun at his hip showed signs of use, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence rather than the swagger of most gunslingers she'd encountered. "One day's ride," she finally agreed. "Then I decide whether to continue with you." Xavier nodded, respecting her caution. "Fair enough. We should make camp soon. There's a creek about 2 miles ahead." As they rode side by side, Willow stole glances at her unexpected companion. His profile was strong, jaw set with determination, but there was a softness around his eyes that hinted at kindness. It was this contradiction that intrigued her most. The creek Xavier mentioned appeared just as the sun began to set. They made camp efficiently, with minimal conversation. Xavier tended the horses while Willow gathered firewood, mindful of her bandaged hand. Over a simple meal of jerky and beans, Xavier finally broke the silence. "What were you doing at Blackwater?" Willow tensed. "How did you know I was there?" "Bandage has the Blackwater Saloon's pattern." He nodded toward her hand. "Recognize it from when I passed through last month." Willow considered lying but opted for a partial truth. "I was working there, serving drinks, and the owner thought I owed him more than my labor." She met his gaze defiantly. "I disagreed." Xavier nodded, unsurprised. "Tom Ratherley's got a reputation." "Hope you gave him something to remember you by." Despite herself, Willow smiled. "A broken bottle across his face should leave a nice reminder." Xavier chuckled. "Good, man like that deserves worse." The crackling fire cast dancing shadows across their faces as night descended fully. Xavier added another log, sending sparks spiraling toward the star-filled sky. "You've been on your own a while," he observed. Willow nodded. "Since my father died 2 years ago, left Pennsylvania with dreams of teaching in California." Got as far as Tucson before I ran out of money and options. Teaching, huh? Xavier looked impressed. You've got schooling. 2 years at the women's college in Philadelphia. Pride crept into her voice despite her efforts to sound nonchalant. Father believed in education even for daughters, smart man, he was. Willow stared into the fire. Until a mining accident took him. Then the company took our home and I took what was left to head west. Xavier was quiet for a long moment. My pa was a miner too, Colorado silver, died of the lung sickness when I was 14. The shared history hung between them, a tenuous thread of connection. What about you? Willow asked. Always been a cowboy, Xavier stretched his long legs toward the fire. Worked the cattle drives up from Texas for a few years after Pa died. Then scouted for the army, did some hunting for the railroad camps. He shrugged. Jack of all trades, master of none, you seem capable enough. I get by. His eyes reflected the firelight as he looked at her. Like you. Willow felt an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. We should sleep. Early start tomorrow. Xavier nodded, rising to check on the horses one last time before settling his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. Sleep well, Miss Oak. Willow, she corrected softly. Just Willow is fine. His smile was the last thing she saw before she closed her eyes. Good night, Willow. Morning arrived with birdsong and the scent of coffee. Xavier had risen before her, quietly preparing for the day's journey. Willow sat up, embarrassed to have slept so soundly in a stranger's presence. You looked peaceful, Xavier commented, handing her a tin cup of strong coffee. Figured you needed the rest. Willow accepted the cup gratefully. Thank you. She inspected her bandaged hand, surprised to find the throbbing had subsided, for everything. They broke camp efficiently and were on the trail as the sun cleared the eastern mountains. The landscape changed gradually as they rode, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub, pine, and juniper. Copper canyons in a high valley, Xavier explained as they navigated a narrow pass. Gets cold in winter, but the springs keep it livable year-round. You've been there before, Xavier nodded. Passed through a few times. Old friend runs the stage stop wrote me saying he could use an extra hand through winter. What kind of place is it? Small, maybe 30 permanent residents. Copper mine nearby brings in workers and the stage route keeps it connected. Xavier glanced at her. Has a little schoolhouse but no teacher since last spring when Mrs. Thornton left to care for her ailing mother. Willow caught his meaningful look. Are you suggesting? Just mentioning it, he said mildly. Folks there are decent, hard-working, kids need learning. The idea took root in Willow's mind despite her attempts to dismiss it. A small community far from Blackwater and Ratherley's reach. A chance to teach again, to use her education rather than pour whiskey for rowdy miners. I'll think about it, she conceded. Xavier smiled but said nothing more. They stopped at midday by a small spring to water the horses and rest. As Willow washed her face in the cool water, Xavier suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his pistol. Don't move, he whispered. Willow froze, her heart hammering. Xavier slowly drew his gun, eyes fixed on something behind her. In one fluid motion, he aimed and fired. The shot echoed through the hills, followed by a heavy thud. Willow spun around to see a rattlesnake, its head blown clean off, just feet from where she'd been kneeling. Diamond back, Xavier said, holstering his weapon. Big one. Willow stared at the dead snake, its body still twitching. I didn't even hear it. Wind was wrong. Xavier approached, kicking the snake's body away from the spring. You all right? Willow nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. That was impressive shooting. Xavier shrugged, but she caught the hint of pride in his eyes. Just practice. He examined the snake. Good eating, though. Shame to waste it. They delayed their journey long enough for Xavier to skin and cook portions of the snake. Willow watched, fascinated despite herself, as he expertly prepared the meat over a small fire. Tastes a bit like chicken, he offered as he handed her a piece skewered on his knife. Willow hesitated only briefly before trying it. The meat was tender and mild, not at all what she expected. It's good, she admitted. Xavier smiled, pleased. See, West's got all sorts of surprises. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the terrain growing more rugged. Willow found herself watching Xavier's hands as he guided his horse with minimal movement, his body moving in perfect rhythm with the animal beneath him. As the sun began to set, they crested a hill to find a sprawling vista below a valley nestled between pine-covered mountains, a ribbon of river cutting through its heart. "Copper Canyon," Xavier announced. "We'll reach town by noon tomorrow." They made camp on the hillside, the valley spread before them like a promise. After dinner, Xavier rebandaged Willow's hand, his fingers lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Healing clean," he noted. "You're lucky." "Lucky you came along," Willow admitted. Xavier met her eyes. "Funny how paths cross when they need to." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of possibilities neither had considered before. Willow was the first to look away, suddenly aware of her racing pulse. "We should rest," she said softly. Xavier nodded, but his eyes remained on her face. "Willow," he began, then hesitated. "If you decide to stay in Copper Canyon, well, I'd be glad of it." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Willow found herself unable to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much of her own conflicted feelings. "We'll see what tomorrow brings," she finally said. That night, Willow lay awake long after Xavier's breathing had deepened with sleep. The stars overhead seemed impossibly bright. The future spread before her like the valley below, unknown, but somehow less frightening than it had been just days ago. Morning brought clarity, as it often did. Willow woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since leaving Pennsylvania. Perhaps Copper Canyon would be just another stop on her journey west, or perhaps it might become something more. Xavier was already saddling the horses when she emerged from her bedroll. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I expected." Willow gathered her few belongings. "Xavier, I've been thinking about what you said about the school," his hand stilled on the saddle cinch. "And I'd like to at least see it, maybe talk to whoever's in charge." Xavier's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "That'd be Mayor Whitley, good man, fair-minded." He finished securing the saddle. "School's been empty since spring. Children are running wild, much to their mother's dismay." Willow nodded, her decision solidifying. "I'll stay until winter at least, see if it's a good fit." "Glad to hear it." Xavier's voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed his pleasure at her decision. They broke camp and descended into the valley, the trail winding through stands of ponderosa pine and alongside the rushing river. By mid-morning, they could see smoke from chimneys rising in the distance, and shortly thereafter, the outlines of buildings took shape. Copper Canyon wasn't much to look at, a single dusty street lined with wooden structures, some more permanent than others. A general store, a smithy, what appeared to be a small church, and at the far end, a two-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Copper Canyon Stage Stop and Hotel. People paused in their activities to watch as Xavier and Willow rode into town, curiosity evident on their faces. A woman hanging laundry waved, and Xavier tipped his hat in response. "Word travels fast," he murmured to Willow. "By sundown, everyone will know you're here." They dismounted in front of the stage stop, where a barrel-chested man with an impressive gray beard emerged onto the porch. "Xavier Galloway, you old wolf," he boomed, descending the steps with surprising agility for his size. "Beginning to think you weren't coming," Xavier grinned, clasping the man's extended hand. "Said I'd be here before the first snow, didn't I, Joe?" He turned to Willow. "This is Miss Willow Oak." "Willow, meet Joseph Farnsworth, proprietor of this fine establishment and the closest thing to civilization for 50 miles. Joseph's eyebrows rose as he took in Willow's presence. "Miss Oak," he said, tipping his hat. "Welcome to Copper Canyon. Any friend of Xavier's is welcome under my roof." "Miss Oak is interested in the teaching position," Xavier explained. Joseph's face lit up. "Is that so? Well, praise the Lord. The mothers hereabouts have been praying for a teacher since Edith Thornton left. You have experience, Miss Oak." "I studied at the Women's College in Philadelphia," Willow replied, "and I taught briefly in Pennsylvania before coming west." "That's more qualification than we've ever had," Joseph laughed. Come in, you must be exhausted from the trail." He ushered them toward the building. "Martha," he called. Prepare rooms for Xavier and Miss Oak. The interior of the stage stop was surprisingly well appointed, with polished wooden floors and a large common room dominated by a stone fireplace. A bespectacled woman with silver-streaked black hair appeared from a back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Xavier Galloway, as I live and breathe," she said, her stern expression softening into a warm smile. "And you've brought company." "Martha Farnsworth, this is Willow Oak," Joseph said. "Potential teacher for our school." Martha's eyes widened with delight. "A teacher? Oh, my dear, you're an answer to prayer." She took Willow's hands in her own. "The children have been running wild since spring. My own granddaughter can barely remember her letters now." Willow found herself enveloped in Martha's warm embrace before being guided toward a staircase. "You'll want to freshen up. I'll have hot water brought up and there's a bath if you'd like." Martha glanced meaningfully at Xavier. "For both of you," Xavier chuckled. "Martha still thinks I don't know how to use soap." "Because last time you were here, you didn't," Martha retorted good-naturedly. "Now come, Miss Oak, let's get you settled." Willow followed Martha upstairs, glancing back to see Xavier and Joseph already deep in conversation. For the first time in months, she felt a tentative hope blossoming. Perhaps Copper Canyon could be the fresh start she'd been seeking. The room Martha showed her was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "It's not much," Martha apologized, "but it's the best we have." "It's perfect," Willow assured her. "Thank you for your hospitality." "Nonsense, we're the ones who should be thanking you if you take the teaching position." Martha hesitated. "The school comes with living quarters, you know." "Small cabin attached to the schoolhouse, nothing fancy but private." "I haven't decided yet," Willow cautioned. "I'd need to see the school, meet the children. Of course, no rush." Martha bustled about, opening the window to let in fresh air. "Dinner's at 6. The mayor will be joining us. He'll want to meet you straight away when he hears about your interest in the position." After Martha left, Willow sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the rapid turn of events. Just days ago, she'd been fleeing for her life, and now she was being welcomed as a potential teacher in a community that seemed genuinely pleased by her arrival. It felt almost too good to be true. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. A young girl, perhaps 12, stood in the hallway with a copper tub and buckets of steaming water. "Ma says you might want a proper bath," she said shyly. Willow smiled. "That would be wonderful, thank you." Once the bath was prepared and the girl had departed, Willow sank gratefully into the hot water, letting it soak away the dust and fatigue of the journey. As she washed, her thoughts drifted to Xavier. The cowboy had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, yet there was something in the way he looked at her that suggested his interest might extend beyond simple courtesy. The realization sent a flutter through her stomach that she quickly suppressed. She was here for a fresh start, not to complicate her life with romantic entanglements. Besides, Xavier had mentioned moving on in the spring. Any attachment would be temporary at best. Clean and dressed in her one spare outfit, a simple blue cotton dress that had seen better days, Willow made her way downstairs as the sun began to set. The common room was filling with people, the buzz of conversation creating a welcoming atmosphere. Xavier stood by the fireplace, freshly bathed and shaved, his dark hair still damp. He'd changed into a clean shirt, and without the dust of the trail, he cut an even more impressive figure. He spotted her immediately, his conversation trailing off mid-sentence as his eyes followed her descent. "Miss Oak," he said as she approached, his voice carrying a note she hadn't heard before. "You look rested, thank you." Willow felt an uncharacteristic flush rise to her cheeks. "As do you." Joseph appeared at their side, accompanied by a distinguished-looking gentleman in his 50s. "Miss Oak, may I present Mayor Harold Whitley? Mayor, this is Miss Willow Oak, our potential new teacher." Mayor Whitley bowed slightly. "Miss Oak, it's an honor." When Joseph sent word that Xavier had arrived with a qualified teacher, I could scarcely believe our good fortune. "Nothing's decided yet," Willow reminded them gently. "I'd like to see the school first." Of course. The mayor nodded eagerly. "First thing tomorrow, I'll give you the tour myself. but tonight we celebrate Xavier's arrival and your potential position with us. Dinner was a lively affair, with most of the town's prominent citizens dropping by to meet Willow and welcome Xavier back. The food was simple but plentiful: roast beef, potatoes, cornbread, and fresh baked apple pie, and Willow found herself enjoying the easy camaraderie of the gathering. Throughout the evening, she was aware of Xavier's presence, his deep laugh occasionally rising above the general conversation. More than once, she caught him watching her, his expression thoughtful. As the gathering began to disperse, Xavier approached her table. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "It's a lot to take in at once." Willow smiled, genuinely pleased by his concern. "I'm well, thank you. Everyone has been very kind. Folks here are good people." Xavier glanced around the room. "Simple maybe, but honest. They'd welcome you properly if you decided to stay." "I'm beginning to see that." Willow met his gaze. "Thank you for bringing me here. Whatever I decide, I'm grateful for the opportunity." Xavier hesitated, then spoke softly. "When I found you by the roadside, bleeding and wary, I never expected." He trailed off, seeming to search for words. "Never expected what?" His eyes held hers. "Never expected to find myself hoping you'd stay." The simple admission hung between them, charged with meaning. Willow felt her heart quicken. "Xavier, you don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "Just know that there's at least one person in Copper Canyon who'd be mighty pleased if you found reason to put down roots." Before Willow could respond, Mayor Whitley approached, breaking the moment. "Miss Oak, I wondered if 9 o'clock tomorrow would suit for our tour of the school." Willow collected herself. "Yes, that would be fine. Excellent, I'll meet you right here." The mayor tipped his hat. "Good evening to you both." As the mayor departed, Xavier smiled ruefully. "I should let you rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day for you." "Good night, Xavier," Willow said softly. "Good night, Willow." He held her gaze a moment longer before turning away, leaving her with a curious mixture of anticipation and uncertainty about what the future might hold. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of possibility. Willow dressed carefully in her blue dress, pinning her hair into a modest chignon. If she was to be considered for a teaching position, she needed to appear professional and respectable. Mayor Whitley was punctual, greeting her warmly as she descended the stairs. "Miss Oak, I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you." "Excellent, excellent. Shall we proceed? The schoolhouse isn't far, just at the edge of town." As they walked along the main street, Mayor Whitley provided a running commentary on Copper Canyon's history and inhabitants. Founded in 1862 after the discovery of copper deposits in the surrounding mountains, the town had grown steadily, if not spectacularly, over the past 16 years. "We've about 20 families now," the mayor explained, "plus the miners who bunk at the company housing. All told, perhaps 100 souls call Copper Canyon home." "And how many children would attend the school?" Willow asked. 28 at last count, ranging from 6 to 15 years of age. Mrs. Thornton had them divided into 3 groups according to age and ability. The mayor glanced at her. "Of course, you'd be free to organize things as you see fit." They turned onto a side path that led to a small clearing where a modest log building stood. Attached to its side was a smaller structure, presumably the teacher's quarters Martha had mentioned. "Here we are," Mayor Whitley announced proudly. "Built by the townspeople 4 years ago, not fancy but solid." The schoolhouse was indeed solidly constructed, with a shake roof and 2 large windows on each side to admit light. A bell hung in a small tower above the entrance, and a woodpile was neatly stacked against one wall. Inside, the schoolroom was clean and surprisingly well equipped. Rows of simple desks faced a larger desk and blackboard at the front. Bookshelves lined the rear wall, containing a modest but respectable collection of texts. "Mrs. Thornton left her teaching materials," the mayor explained, gesturing to the shelves. "McGuffey's Readers, Ray's Arithmetic, Webster's Speller, the Essentials." Willow ran her fingers along the spines, noting with approval the quality of the selections. "This is more than I expected," she admitted. "We value education here," Mayor Whitley said simply. "Many of us came west with little schooling ourselves. We want better for our children." He showed her the attached living quarters next a small but comfortable cabin with a bedroom, a combined kitchen and sitting area, and a tiny washroom. It was furnished basically but adequately, with a bed, table, chairs, and a small cookstove. The terms we offer are room and board, plus $40 per month during the school term, September through May, Mayor Whitley explained. Free use of the cabin year-round, of course. Most families contribute food and firewood as well. It was a generous offer by frontier standards, far better than what Willow had earned at the Blackwater Saloon and infinitely more respectable. "When would you need my decision?" she asked. "Well, school term starts in 3 weeks," the mayor replied, "but the sooner the better, naturally. The children have been without formal instruction for months." Willow nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like a day or two to consider if that's acceptable." Of course. Take your time," Mayor Whitley beamed at her. "Though I must say, the town would be delighted to have someone of your qualifications take the position." As they walked back toward the stage stop, Willow couldn't help but notice the curious glances directed her way by townspeople going about their business. News of her potential role had clearly spread quickly. "Word travels fast," she observed, the mayor chuckled. "Small town, not much happens without everyone knowing. It'll take some getting used to if you stay, I expect. I'm beginning to realize that." Despite the lack of privacy, Willow found herself warming to the idea of belonging to a community again. After months of anonymity and isolation, there was something appealing about being known and valued. They parted at the stage stop, with Mayor Whitley promising to check in the following day. As Willow entered the building, she spotted Xavier in the common room, engaged in conversation with Joseph and several other men. He glanced up as she entered, a smile breaking across his features. Excusing himself, he approached her. "How was the tour?" "Impressive," Willow admitted. "The school is better equipped than I expected, and the mayor's offer is generous." Xavier nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Told you it was a good place. You thinking of accepting?" "I'm leaning that way." Willow hesitated. "What about you? You mentioned moving on in spring." Something flickered in Xavier's eyes. That was the plan, but plans can change. The simple statement carried weight that Willow wasn't ready to examine too closely. "I should rest," she said, suddenly needing space to think. "It's been an overwhelming morning." Xavier nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Of course, I'll be around if you want to talk later." Upstairs in her room, Willow sat on the edge of the bed, turning over the morning's events in her mind. The teaching position offered stability, respectability, and purpose, everything she'd been seeking since leaving Pennsylvania. The community seemed welcoming, the children in need of education she was qualified to provide, and then there was Xavier. In just a few days, he'd gone from stranger to friend, certainly. But there was an undeniable pull between them that suggested the potential for more. The way he looked at her, spoke to her, it awakened feelings she'd thought buried after her disastrous encounter with a young professor in Philadelphia 2 years earlier. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Willow, it's Martha. May I come in?" "Of course." Martha entered, carrying a tray with tea and sandwiches. "Thought you might be hungry after your morning with the mayor. Harold can talk the hind leg off a mule when he gets going." Willow laughed. He was very thorough in his tour. Martha set the tray on the small table by the window and gestured for Willow to join her. "So, what did you think of our little school?" "It's lovely," Willow admitted, accepting a cup of tea. "Far better than I expected for a frontier town." "We may be small, but we have aspirations." Martha's eyes twinkled. "Especially for our children." They chatted comfortably as Willow ate, with Martha providing insights into the town's families and children that the mayor had overlooked. By the time Martha rose to leave, Willow had a much clearer picture of the community she was considering joining. "One more thing," Martha said, pausing at the door. "About Xavier." Willow tensed slightly. "What about him?" Martha's expression softened. "He's a good man, better than most. Known him since he was a gangly youth passing through with his first cattle drive." She hesitated. "He's never brought anyone to Copper Canyon before, never even mentioned a woman in all the years he's been stopping here." Willow wasn't sure how to respond. "We only met a few days ago on the trail." He was kind enough to offer protection for the journey. Martha smiled knowingly. Maybe so, but I've seen how he looks at you, and how you look at him when you think no one's noticing. She opened the door. Just something to consider while you're making your decision about staying. After Martha left, Willow stood by the window, watching the activity on the street below. Her gaze was drawn to Xavier, now emerged from the stage stop and crossing to the livery stable. Even from a distance, there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength and dignity that set him apart. As if sensing her observation, Xavier paused and looked up, catching sight of her at the window. He tipped his hat, a simple gesture that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through her. Willow smiled and stepped back, her decision crystallizing. By evening, she had made up her mind. When Mayor Whitley stopped by after dinner, Willow informed him she would accept the teaching position. "Splendid," the mayor exclaimed, pumping her hand enthusiastically. "Absolutely splendid. We'll have the announcement in church on Sunday and school can begin the following Monday if that suits." "That would be perfect," Willow agreed. "It will give me time to review the materials and prepare lessons." News of her acceptance spread rapidly. Throughout the evening, townsfolk stopped by to introduce themselves and express their delight. Mothers promised to bring their children by to meet her, while fathers assured her of their support in maintaining discipline. Xavier watched from across the room, a quiet smile playing at his lips. When the crowd finally thinned, he approached, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. "Seems like cause for celebration," he said, offering her one. "To Copper Canyon's new schoolteacher." Willow accepted the glass, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Thank you for everything." They found a quiet corner where they could speak privately. "So you're staying," Xavier said, satisfaction evident in his tone. "At least until summer," Willow confirmed. "After that, we'll see." Xavier nodded, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Heard from Joe that the mine's expanding operations. They'll need someone with experience to handle the new horses and equipment they're bringing in." Willow raised an eyebrow. "Someone like you, maybe." Xavier's eyes met hers. "If I had reason to put down roots for a while." The implication hung between them, both thrilling and terrifying. Willow took a sip of whiskey to steady herself. That would be quite a change for a man used to moving with the seasons. Some changes are worth making. Xavier's voice was low, meant only for her, when the right opportunity comes along. Before Willow could respond, Joseph called for attention, raising his glass in a toast to the town's new teacher. The moment between them broken, Xavier moved aside as townsfolk once again surrounded Willow with well wishes. The following days passed in a whirl of activity as Willow prepared for the start of school. She moved into the teacher's cabin, arranged the classroom, and met with families to assess their children's educational levels. Xavier assisted whenever possible, helping to repair desks, chop firewood, and carry supplies from the general store. On Sunday, Willow attended church with the entire community. Pastor Reynolds formally introduced her to the congregation, and she was touched by the genuine welcome she received. Parents informed their children that school would resume the following day, eliciting mixed reactions of excitement and dismay that made the adults chuckle knowingly. That evening, Xavier walked Willow back to her cabin from the church social. The August night was mild, stars blanketing the sky above the small valley. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked as they strolled along the path. "A little," Willow admitted. "It's been a while since I taught, and never so many children of varying ages and abilities." "You'll do fine," Xavier assured her. "These kids are hungry for learning, even if they don't all know it yet." They reached her cabin, and Willow hesitated at the door. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" Xavier seemed surprised by the invitation but nodded. "I'd like that." Inside, Willow busied herself with the coffee pot while Xavier studied the changes she'd made to the small living space. She'd added touches that made it feel like home wildflowers in a jar on the table, a colorful quilt on the bed, books arranged neatly on the small shelf. "You've settled in quickly," he observed. Willow smiled, handing him a steaming cup. "It's the first place that's truly been mine since Pennsylvania. Even if it's temporary, I wanted it to feel like home." They sat at the small table, the lamplight casting a warm glow over their faces. For a time, they spoke of practical matters: the school schedule, the approaching winter, the supplies they both needed from the next supply wagon. Eventually, a comfortable silence fell between them. Xavier's eyes roamed her face, his expression thoughtful. "You know, when I found you on that trail, bleeding from that cut on your hand, I never imagined we'd end up here." Willow glanced down at her palm, where a thin scar was all that remained of the wound. "Nor did I. Funny how life works." Xavier set down his cup. "Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes." "Is that what this is?" Willow asked softly. "A change for the better." Xavier held her gaze. "For me, without question." The sincerity in his voice made Willow's heart quicken. "Xavier." She began, then faltered, unsure how to express the confusion of emotions he stirred within her. "You don't need to say anything," he assured her. "I know it's fast. We barely know each other, really." "No," Willow surprised herself with her vehemence. "We do know each other. Maybe not the details, but the essentials." She reached across the table, tentatively touching his hand. "You've shown me who you are through your actions, your kindness. That tells me more than words ever could." Xavier turned his hand to clasp hers, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "There's something between us, Willow, something I've never felt before." "I feel it too," she admitted, the confession both frightening and liberating. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of trusting, of believing in something that might not last." Willow withdrew her hand reluctantly. "You said yourself you're a man who moves with the seasons." Xavier leaned forward, his expression earnest. "That was before I met you, before I saw what could be possible here." The hope in his eyes was almost painful to witness. Willow wanted desperately to believe him, to trust that what was growing between them could withstand the uncertainties of the future. "I need time," she finally said. "Time to be sure of what I want, of who I am here in Copper Canyon." Xavier nodded, acceptance in his gaze despite the disappointment he couldn't quite hide. "Time is something I can give you." He rose from the table. "I should go. You need rest before tomorrow." At the door he paused, turning back to her. "One more thing, Willow." "Yes." His eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. "When you decide what you want, I'll be here. That's a promise." After he left, Willow sat alone in the quiet cabin, her thoughts in turmoil. Xavier's promise hung in the air like the scent of his coffee, tangible and tempting. For the first time since her father's death, Willow allowed herself to imagine a future that included more than mere survival, a future with roots, purpose, and perhaps even love. School began the next morning with 26 children of varying ages and abilities filling the small classroom. Willow quickly discovered that while some had received solid foundational education under Mrs. Thornton, others, particularly those from outlying homesteads, had significant gaps in their learning. She divided them into 3 groups as Mrs. Thornton had done, but adjusted the divisions based on ability rather than strictly by age. The arrangement caused some initial grumbling from older children placed with younger ones, but Willow's firm yet kind approach soon established both her authority and her commitment to helping each child progress. The days settled into a rhythm. Mornings were devoted to the essentials: reading, writing, arithmetic, while afternoons included history, geography, and natural sciences. Fridays featured recitations and spelling bees that soon became community events, with parents and townspeople gathering to witness the children's progress. Xavier kept his distance during school hours, respecting Willow's need to establish herself independently. But he was never far away, working with Joseph at the stage stop or helping at the livery stable. In the evenings, he often walked with Willow after supper, their conversations ranging from childhood memories to dreams for the future. September passed into October, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color to the surrounding mountains. The children made steady progress under Willow's guidance, even the most reluctant learners beginning to show interest and improvement. One crisp Saturday morning, Xavier appeared at Willow's door with a picnic basket and a proposal. "The aspen groves are turning golden," he said. "Thought you might like to see them before the leaves fall." Willow agreed eagerly, welcoming the chance to explore beyond the town's boundaries. They rode into the foothills, Xavier leading the way along game trails that wound through stands of pine and fir. As they climbed higher, the forest opened to reveal slopes covered in aspen trees, their leaves shimmering gold and orange in the October sunlight. "It's beautiful," Willow breathed, dismounting to better appreciate the spectacle. Xavier spread a blanket in a small clearing, the golden canopy above dappling the ground with shifting patterns of light and shadow. As they shared the simple meal Martha had packed fried chicken, biscuits, apple tarts, Willow found herself studying Xavier's profile, struck anew by the quiet strength in his features. "Tell me about your family," she said suddenly. "You mentioned your father was a miner, but what about your mother?" "Siblings," Xavier leaned back, his expression softening with memory. "Ma died when I was 10, influenza. Pa never remarried, raised me and my sister Eliza on his own until the mining dust took him." "You have a sister?" Willow was surprised he hadn't mentioned her before. Had. Xavier's voice held old pain. "She married young to a man who took her to California. Got a letter 3 years ago saying she'd died in childbirth. Never even met her husband." Willow reached out, covering his hand with hers. "I'm sorry." Xavier turned his palm up to clasp her fingers. "Life out west is hard on women. One reason I admire your courage in coming alone. Not courage so much as necessity," Willow admitted. "After father died, there was nothing left for me in Pennsylvania. No suitors. Hard to believe a woman like you was left alone." Willow hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "There was someone. A young professor at the college where I studied. He made promises he had no intention of keeping." Understanding darkened Xavier's gaze. "He hurt you. My pride more than my heart," Willow assured him. "But it taught me caution, made me wary of men's promises." "Including mine?" Xavier asked quietly. Willow met his eyes. "I want to believe you, Xavier, more than I've wanted anything in a long time, but trust comes hard when it's been broken before." Xavier squeezed her hand gently. "I understand, Willow, and I'm willing to prove myself, however long it takes." They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its descent behind the western mountains, casting long shadows across the golden grove. When Xavier finally spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "Love's a complicated thing," he said. "My pa used to say it was like breaking a wild horse, thrilling and dangerous all at once." Willow smiled at the comparison. "How so?" Xavier's eyes held hers. "Because love makes you bleed, opens you up to hurts you'd never feel otherwise." The words hung between them, weighted with truth. Willow felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "That's a somber view." "Not somber," Xavier corrected gently. "Just honest. Anything worth having comes with risk." As they packed up and prepared to return to town, Willow found herself turning his words over in her mind. Love makes you bleed. She'd bled already from rejection, from loss, from the struggle to survive in a world that offered women few choices. Yet here she was, contemplating opening herself to potential hurt again. The sun was setting as they rode back into Copper Canyon, painting the humble buildings in shades of gold and amber. To Willow's surprise, an unusual level of activity greeted them. A crowd had gathered outside the general store, voices raised in excitement or concern it was difficult to tell from a distance. "Something's happened," Xavier said, urging his horse forward. They reached the edge of the crowd just as Mayor Whitley spotted them. "Xavier, Miss Oak." "Thank goodness you've returned. What's wrong?" Xavier asked, dismounting swiftly. "Stage was robbed about 10 miles south," the mayor explained grimly. "Driver was shot, not fatally, thank the Lord, but he's in bad shape. Dr. Henderson's with him now." "Robbers," Xavier's expression hardened. 3 men masked took the strongbox with the mine payroll and headed east into the Badlands. The mayor lowered his voice. "Sheriff's forming a posse, but most men here are miners or shopkeepers, not trackers," Xavier finished for him. "I'll help." Willow felt a cold knot of fear form in her stomach. "Xavier." He turned to her, his expression softening briefly. "I have to, Willow. I know those Badlands better than anyone here." Sheriff Landry, a weathered man in his 40s, pushed through the crowd. "Galloway, heard you were back. You in?" Xavier nodded grimly. "Who else?" "Got 5 men with riding experience. None with tracking skills like yours, though." When do we leave? Dawn, the sheriff said. Any later and the trail will be cold. Xavier turned back to Willow, who stood frozen, the golden memory of their afternoon together now overshadowed by looming danger. I need to prepare, he said softly. Will you be all right getting back to your cabin? Willow nodded mutely, unable to voice the sudden fear that gripped her. Xavier seemed to understand, his eyes holding hers for a long moment before he turned to follow the sheriff. That night, Willow barely slept, her mind filled with visions of Xavier facing unknown dangers in the Badlands. The territory east of Copper Canyon was notorious a maze of rocky ravines and hidden gulches where outlaws could easily ambush pursuers. Before dawn, she rose and dressed, determined to see Xavier before he departed. The main street was already busy despite the early hour with the posse preparing to ride out. Xavier stood checking his saddle cinches, his expression focused and grim. He looked up as Willow approached, surprise and something else pleasure, softening his features. Willow, you didn't need to come. I needed to see you, she contradicted, her voice low, to ask you to be careful. Xavier's hand came up to touch her cheek briefly. I'll be back before you know it. Willow caught his hand, holding it against her face. Promise me. I promise. His eyes never left hers. We have unfinished business, you and I. The sheriff called for the posse to mount up. Xavier reluctantly pulled away, swinging into the saddle with practiced ease. 3 days, he said, 4 at most. As the posse rode out of town, dust rising in the pale dawn light, Willow stood watching until they disappeared from view. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge the depth of her feelings for Xavier Galloway, feelings that had taken root so quickly and grown so strong that the prospect of losing him was physically painful. The town seemed strangely empty without Xavier's presence, though life continued its normal rhythm. Willow taught her classes, the children seemingly oblivious to her distraction. In the evenings, she sat with Martha and Joseph, listening for any news of the posse. No news is good news, Joseph assured her on the second night. If anything had happened, we'd have heard by now. Martha patted Willow's hand sympathetically. Xavier's experienced in the ways of the frontier. If anyone can track those robbers and return safely, it's him. Willow nodded, grateful for their kindness, but unable to shake her sense of foreboding. That night, she dreamed of Xavier lying wounded in a rocky gulch, calling her name as blood seeped into the parched earth beneath him. She woke gasping, the dream so vivid she could almost smell the copper scent of blood. Unable to return to sleep, she sat by her window, watching the stars wheel slowly across the night sky, praying for Xavier's safe return. The 3rd day passed with agonizing slowness. Willow dismissed her students early, unable to concentrate on their lessons. As she walked back to her cabin, she noticed a crowd gathering once again at the center of town, her heart racing. Willow hurried toward the commotion. Had the posse returned? Was Xavier among them? The questions pounded in her mind with each rapid step. Mayor Whitley spotted her approaching and hurried to intercept her. Miss Oak, he said, his expression grave. I was just coming to find you. Willow's blood turned to ice. What's happened? Is it Xavier? The mayor hesitated. The posse encountered the robbers in Devil's Canyon yesterday. There was a firefight. Most of the men have returned, but what? Willow demanded, fear making her voice sharp. Xavier and Sheriff Landry stayed behind to pursue the leader, who escaped with the payroll. They were supposed to return by nightfall yesterday. They haven't been seen since. Willow swayed, the world momentarily dimming around her. The mayor caught her elbow, steadying her. Now, Miss Oak, no need to assume the worst. Xavier knows those Badlands better than anyone. Probably just taking his time, making sure they recover the money. But Willow knew something had gone wrong. Xavier had promised to return, and he was a man who kept his promises unless something prevented him. Who's going after them? She demanded. The mayor looked uncomfortable. Well, that's the problem. The men who returned are exhausted, some wounded, and no one else knows those Badlands well enough to navigate them safely. Then I'll go, Willow said, the decision crystallizing even as the words left her mouth. You, the mayor looked scandalized. Miss Oak, I cannot permit. You cannot stop me, Willow interrupted, a steel entering her voice that surprised even her. "I've ridden these mountains with Xavier. He showed me landmarks, trails. I may not be a tracker, but I know enough to follow the obvious route to Devil's Canyon." "It's far too dangerous for a woman alone," the mayor protested. "Then find me someone to accompany me," Willow countered. "But I am going, Mayor Whitley, with or without your blessing." The determination in her voice must have convinced him, for the mayor sighed heavily. "At least wait until morning. And take young Jenkins with you. He's the best shot among those who returned, and he knows the general area." Willow agreed, though the delay chafed at her. She spent the evening gathering supplies and consulting with Jenkins, a quiet young man who had been part of the original posse. He seemed dubious about their chances but respected Willow's determination to find Xavier. They set out at first light, riding east toward the Badlands. Jenkins led initially, following the same trail the posse had taken. As they rode, he filled Willow in on what had happened. "We tracked them to Devil's Canyon by noon of the second day," he explained. "Caught them making camp, thinking they were safe. Sheriff ordered us to surround them before moving in." "What went wrong?" Willow asked. Jenkins shook his head. "One of the men, Blake, I think his horse stepped on a loose rock, gave us away. Shooting started before we were all in position." "And the robbers?" "Two went down in the first exchange. Third one, their leader, he was crafty, made it to a horse and took off deeper into the canyon with the payroll still strapped to his saddle." Jenkins frowned at the memory. "Sheriff and Xavier went after him. Told us to get the wounded back to town and said they'd be right behind us." They reached Devil's Canyon by mid-afternoon, the sun already beginning to sink behind the western ridges. The canyon was eerily beautiful in its desolation, towering red rock walls streaked with black and orange, the floor scattered with boulders and sparse vegetation. "This is where the shootout happened," Jenkins said, gesturing to an area where the ground was disturbed and spent cartridges glinted in the dirt. Willow dismounted, scanning the area. "Which way did they go after?" Jenkins pointed toward a narrow gap in the eastern wall of the canyon. "Through there leads to a maze of smaller canyons and dry washes." They followed the tracks through the gap, the path growing more difficult as the terrain roughened. Jenkins grew increasingly uneasy as shadows lengthened. "We should make camp soon," he suggested. "Can't track in the dark, and these badlands aren't safe at night." Willow wanted to press on, but logic prevailed. They made a small camp in a sheltered alcove, Jenkins keeping watch while Willow tried to rest. Sleep eluded her, her mind filled with images of Xavier wounded or worse. Dawn found them already mounted and following the increasingly faint trail. By mid-morning, even Jenkins was impressed by how far the pursuit had come. "Xavier and the sheriff must have been right on his heels," he observed. "These tracks are close together, like they were riding hard." They rounded a bend in a narrow ravine, and Jenkins suddenly raised his hand, signaling Willow to stop. "Something ahead," he whispered, reaching for his rifle. Willow squinted against the harsh sunlight reflecting off the canyon walls. About 50 yards ahead, something dark lay across the trail, something that hadn't been there long enough for the ever-present dust to cover it. Jenkins dismounted, rifle ready, and approached cautiously. Willow followed, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it must be audible in the stillness of the ravine. It was Sheriff Landry, lying face down in the dirt, a dark stain spreading from beneath his still form. Jenkins knelt beside him, checking for signs of life, then shook his head grimly. "Shot in the back," he reported, his voice tight with anger. "Must have been an ambush." Willow scanned the surrounding cliffs frantically. "Xavier, do you see any sign of him?" Jenkins examined the ground carefully. "Two sets of tracks continue on, one heavier than the other. Could be Xavier's still in pursuit." Or being pursued, Willow thought but didn't say. They couldn't leave the sheriff's body exposed, but neither could they take the time to return him to town. In the end, they covered him with rocks, a temporary cairn that would protect him from scavengers until a proper burial party could be sent. They continued following the tracks, which led through increasingly difficult terrain. By late afternoon, Jenkins was forced to admit they were lost. "Tracks are gone," he said, frustration evident in his voice. Ground's too rocky to hold prints, could have gone in any direction from here. Willow refused to give up. Xavier told me once that in the Badlands, water is life. If the robber is trying to escape, he'd need water for himself and his horse. There's a spring about 2 miles east, Jenkins said slowly. Only reliable water source in this section of the Badlands. Then that's where we go, Willow decided. The spring was hidden in a small box canyon, a trickle of water emerging from a crack in the stone wall to form a small, clear pool. As they approached cautiously, Willow's heart leapt at the sight of a horse, Xavier's chestnut stallion, grazing on the sparse vegetation nearby. "He's here," she whispered, hope and fear mingling in her voice. Jenkins signaled for caution, dismounting and drawing his rifle. Willow followed suit, her eyes scanning the small canyon for any sign of movement. The crack of a pistol shattered the silence. Jenkins cried out, dropping his rifle as he clutched his shoulder. Willow dragged him behind a boulder as a second shot ricocheted off the stone. "Come out with your hands up," a harsh voice commanded from somewhere among the rocks on the opposite side of the spring. "Or the next bullet finds your heart. We're looking for our friend," Willow called back, her voice surprisingly steady despite her terror. "Xavier Galloway, is he here?" A pause then. "The cowboy, he's here all right, might even still be alive for now." Willow's blood ran cold. "We just want to take him home. Let us have him and you can go." Harsh laughter answered her. "Lady, you're in no position to negotiate. I've got your friend, I've got the high ground, and I've got a clear shot at both of you the minute you move from behind that rock." Jenkins grimaced in pain, blood seeping between the fingers pressed to his shoulder. "He's right," he whispered. "We're pinned down." Willow's mind raced. Xavier was alive but injured, that much she could deduce from the robber's words, but how badly hurt? And how could they reach him without getting themselves killed in the process? "What do you want?" she called out. "There must be something we can trade for our friend's life." Another pause, longer this time. "Got fresh horses," the voice finally replied. "Mine's about done in. Give me your mounts and supplies, and I might leave your cowboy breathing when I go." "How do we know you'll keep your word?" Willow demanded. "Don't," came the blunt reply, "but it's the only offer you're getting." Jenkins shook his head weakly. "Can't trust him, Miss Oak. Moment we step out, he'll shoot us both." Willow knew he was right, but what choice did they have? Xavier needed help, and they were his only hope. She couldn't leave him to die, not when she'd finally recognized the depth of her feelings for him. "I need to think," she said, her mind working frantically. The sun was sinking toward the western ridge, shadows lengthening across the small canyon. Soon it would be dark, which might offer some advantage or make their situation even more perilous. "Jenkins," she whispered, "can you still shoot?" He nodded grimly. "Left-handed, not as accurate, but I can fire." "I need a distraction," Willow explained. "When the sun touches that ridge, start shooting, aim high, just make noise. I'm going to circle around and try to reach Xavier." Jenkins looked doubtful. "It's too dangerous, Miss Oak." "I'm not leaving without him," Willow said firmly. As they waited for the sun to reach the appointed position, Willow prepared herself. She removed her heavy skirt, leaving only the split riding skirt she wore beneath for practicality. She twisted her hair into a tight knot, securing it with pins, and checked that her small derringer, a gift from her father that she carried always, was loaded. When the moment came, Jenkins began firing rapidly, the shots echoing deafeningly in the confined space of the canyon. The robber returned fire, his attention focused on the boulder where Jenkins sheltered. Willow slipped away, keeping low and using the growing shadows to conceal her movement. She circled wide, climbing a steep, rocky slope that should position her above and behind where the robber was hidden. The shooting continued as she picked her way carefully across the treacherous terrain. One misstep, one dislodged stone, would alert the robber to her movement. Sweat trickled down her back despite the cooling evening air, fear and determination driving her forward. Finally, she reached a position where she could see down into a small hollow where the robber crouched behind a fallen boulder. He was focused on Jenkins's position, unaware of her approach. Beyond him, partially concealed by an outcropping, she could just make out a still form that had to be Xavier. Willow's heart pounded as she assessed the situation. The robber was armed with both a rifle and a pistol, while she had only her small derringer with its limited range and accuracy. She needed to get closer. Slowly, using every bit of cover available, Willow worked her way down toward the hollow. The shooting had become sporadic now, both men conserving ammunition. As she neared her target, Willow saw Xavier more clearly. He lay motionless, blood staining his shirt, eyes closed. Was he still breathing? From this distance, she couldn't tell. The robber shifted position, giving Willow her first clear look at his face. He was younger than she expected, perhaps no more than 25, with a scruff of beard and cold, calculating eyes. A blood-stained bandage wrapped his left forearm, evidence that Xavier had not been taken easily. Willow was now close enough to use her derringer effectively, but hesitated. One shot was all she would get, and if she missed, both she and Xavier would surely die. She needed to be certain. Gathering her courage, Willow moved closer still, freezing when a small stone dislodged beneath her foot and clattered down the slope. The robber whirled, his rifle coming up as he scanned the darkening landscape. Willow held her breath, pressed flat against the rock face, praying the growing darkness would conceal her. For an agonizing moment, the robber's gaze seemed to fix directly on her position. Then, apparently satisfied, he turned back to watch Jenkins's boulder. It was now or never. Willow raised her derringer, aimed carefully at the center of the robber's back, and squeezed the trigger. The small gun's report seemed impossibly loud in the confined space. The robber jerked, then spun around, his rifle coming up even as blood blossomed across his shirt. Willow froze, realizing with horror that her shot, while striking home, hadn't been immediately fatal. For an eternal moment, they stared at each other across the small distance, the robber's eyes widening with surprise, then narrowing with murderous intent. His rifle rose, centering on Willow's chest. A second shot cracked through the canyon and the robber collapsed, a neat hole appearing in the center of his forehead. Willow turned in shock to see Xavier propped on one elbow, his revolver still raised, smoke curling from its barrel. Xavier. Willow scrambled down the remaining distance, heedless of the loose rocks and potential for injury. He lowered his gun with a grimace of pain. "Willow, what in God's name are you doing here?" She reached his side, hands immediately moving to assess his injuries. "Saving you, apparently. Though it seems you returned the favor." Xavier winced as her fingers found a bullet wound in his side. "Been better days," he admitted. "Sheriff," Willow hesitated, then shook her head slightly. Xavier's jaw tightened, grief and anger flashing in his eyes before he mastered himself. "Jenkins is here too," she explained quickly. "He's wounded but alive." As if summoned by her words, Jenkins appeared at the edge of the hollow, his left arm cradling his injured right. "Miss Oak, you all right?" "Yes," she called back. "The robber is dead. Xavier's hurt but alive." "Can you bring the canteens and medical supplies?" With Jenkins's help, Willow cleaned and bandaged Xavier's wound as best she could. The bullet had passed through his side, missing vital organs but leaving him weak from blood loss and exposure. He'd been lying in the hollow since the previous day, unable to move after being shot during the confrontation with the robber. "Thought I was done for," Xavier admitted as Willow helped him drink from the canteen. "Then I heard your voice." Willow's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "You promised you'd be back in 3 days. I was holding you to that." A ghost of a smile touched Xavier's pale lips. "Seems I underestimated the stubbornness of schoolteachers." They made camp in the Box Canyon, none of them in condition to travel before morning. Jenkins located the mine payroll in the robber's saddlebags, the cause of so much bloodshed now, nothing more than a heavy box of coins and currency. As night settled fully over the Badlands, Jenkins took first watch despite his injury, giving Willow time to tend to Xavier. His condition worried her. His skin was hot to the touch, his breathing shallow. Infection was setting in, and they needed to get him to Dr. Henderson as quickly as possible. Willow sat beside him, bathing his forehead with cool water from the spring. Xavier drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring words she couldn't catch. Once his eyes opened, unusually bright with fever. "Willow," he said, his voice stronger than she expected. "Need to tell you something." Save your strength, she urged, but he shook his head. Might not get another chance. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. What I said before about love making you bleed, it's true, but it's worth it. Willow's throat tightened with emotion. Xavier. Let me finish. His eyes held hers intently. Thought I was dying yesterday. All I could think about was you, how I never told you, never properly said. I know, Willow whispered, tears spilling freely now. I know, Xavier, I feel the same. A smile transformed his pain-lined face. You do, Willow leaned down, pressing her forehead gently against his. Yes, that's why I came after you. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. Xavier's free hand came up to touch her cheek. The cowboy said, love makes you bleed, he murmured. Willow turned her face to press a kiss to his palm. Then let's bleed together, cowboy, she whispered, for as long as we have. Something in Xavier's eyes softened, a peace settling over his features despite the pain. Together, he agreed softly. I like the sound of that. They began the journey back to Copper Canyon at first light, Xavier secured on his horse with ropes to prevent him falling if he lost consciousness. Progress was agonizingly slow through the difficult terrain, with both Xavier and Jenkins weakening as the day wore on. By nightfall, they had cleared the worst of the Badlands but were still at least a day's ride from town. They made camp in a sheltered grove, Willow tending to both men's wounds with their dwindling medical supplies. Xavier's fever had worsened, his skin burning to the touch. In his delirium, he called for people Willow didn't know: his father, his sister Eliza, Sheriff Landry. Sometimes he called for Willow, even as she sat beside him, her heart breaking at her inability to ease his suffering. We need to get him to town, Jenkins said grimly as they shared the last of their jerky. He won't last another day like this, Willow nodded, a desperate plan forming in her mind. At first light, I'll ride ahead for help. You stay with Xavier, keep him as comfortable as possible. Jenkins looked doubtful. Miss Oak, no offense, but you don't know these mountains well enough to ride alone, especially at speed. I have to try, Willow insisted. What other choice do we have? Before Jenkins could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. They tensed, Jenkins reaching for his rifle despite his injured shoulder. Could be more of the gang, he whispered. Willow doused their small fire quickly, plunging the camp into darkness. They waited, weapons ready, as the hoofbeats grew closer. Hello, the camp, a familiar voice called. Jenkins, Miss Oak, relief flooded through Willow. Joseph, is that you? Yes, madam, Joseph Farnsworth's voice answered. Got Mayor Whitley and Dr. Henderson with me and half a dozen men besides. The rescue party had set out when Jenkins and Willow failed to return on schedule. Guided by the tracks they'd left, the men had pushed hard to reach them before nightfall. Dr. Henderson immediately took charge of Xavier's care, administering medicines he'd brought specifically in case they found injuries. He's in bad shape, the doctor admitted privately to Willow. But he's strong. If we can get him back to town by tomorrow evening, he has a fighting chance. They departed at first light, Xavier carefully secured in a makeshift travois constructed by the rescue party. Willow rode beside him, watching for any change in his condition, praying silently for his survival. The journey back to Copper Canyon seemed endless, each jolt of the travois causing Xavier to moan despite his unconscious state. Willow felt every sound like a physical pain, her own body aching with exhaustion and worry. They reached town just as the sun was setting, the entire population turning out to witness their arrival. Xavier and Jenkins were taken directly to Dr. Henderson's clinic, while Willow found herself surrounded by concerned townspeople, all eager to hear what had happened. Martha rescued her from the crowd, leading her to the stage stop and upstairs to her old room. You need rest, Martha insisted, helping Willow out of her filthy, blood-stained clothes. I'll bring food and then you'll sleep. Xavier is in good hands now. Too exhausted to argue, Willow allowed herself to be cared for. After eating the soup Martha brought, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep that lasted well into the following day. When she finally awoke, Willow's first thought was of Xavier. She dressed hurriedly and made her way to Dr. Henderson's clinic, her heart in her throat as she knocked on the door. The doctor himself answered, his tired face breaking into a smile at the sight of her. "Miss Oak, I was wondering when you'd appear. How is he?" Willow asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "See for yourself." Dr. Henderson stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Xavier lay on a narrow bed, his torso swathed in clean bandages. His face was still pale, but the feverish flush had receded. As Willow approached, his eyes opened, focusing on her with a clarity that sent relief flooding through her. "There she is," he said, his voice weak but steady. "The school teacher who thinks she's a bounty hunter." Willow laughed through sudden tears, moving to his bedside and taking his hand in both of hers. "How do you feel?" "Like I was shot, left for dead, then dragged across the Badlands on a travois," Xavier replied with a hint of his usual humor. "But Doc says I'll live. He'll recover fully with time and care," Dr. Henderson confirmed from the doorway, "though he'll need to take it easy for several weeks." "Several weeks," Xavier protested. "At least," the doctor said firmly. "That bullet did considerable damage, Mr. Galloway." "You're fortunate to be alive." After the doctor left them alone, Xavier's expression grew serious. "Willow, what you did was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish." "I couldn't leave you out there," she said simply. Xavier's fingers tightened around hers. "In the canyon, what you said." "About bleeding together, did you mean it?" Willow met his gaze steadily. "Every word. Even though loving me might bring more pain than joy," his eyes searched hers. "Even though I'm just a drifter with nothing to offer but myself." "You're not just anything, Xavier Galloway," Willow countered. "And yes, even knowing that love means risk, even knowing we might hurt each other or lose each other someday." She leaned closer, her voice softening. "I'd rather have moments of joy with you than a lifetime of safety without you." The weeks of Xavier's recovery passed more quickly than Willow expected. She divided her time between teaching and caring for him, first at the clinic and later at the stage stop when Dr. Henderson deemed him well enough to move. November brought the first snow to Copper Canyon, blanketing the valley in pristine white. The schoolchildren, excited by the change in weather, became restless in the classroom, leading Willow to incorporate more physical activities into their lessons. Xavier grew stronger daily, first walking with assistance, then alone, and finally riding short distances as December approached. The townsfolk treated him as a hero, the man who had pursued Sheriff Landry's killer and recovered the mine payroll at great personal cost. One crisp December evening, with Christmas just weeks away, Xavier invited Willow for a walk despite the cold. They strolled arm in arm through town, their breath forming clouds in the frosty air, snowflakes occasionally drifting down from the darkening sky. "I've been thinking," Xavier said as they paused to admire the way ice crystals had formed along the eaves of the church. "About the future." Willow's heart quickened. They hadn't spoken much about what would happen when spring arrived, whether Xavier would stay in Copper Canyon or resume his wandering life. "What about it?" she asked carefully. Xavier turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "The mine manager offered me a permanent position. Foreman of the stables and transport division." "Xavier, that's wonderful," Willow exclaimed. "Did you accept?" "Told him I needed to discuss it with someone first." His eyes held hers intently. "Someone whose plans might affect my own." Willow felt a surge of hope. "My contract with the school runs through May," she said, "but Mayor Whitley has already asked if I'd consider staying on next year. And will you?" Xavier's voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed his investment in her answer. "That depends," Willow replied softly. "On what?" She squeezed his hands. "On whether I have reason to put down roots here, on whether certain promises made in fever might be remembered in health." Xavier's expression softened. "I remember every word, Willow, every promise, every moment since I found you bleeding by that roadside." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing something small that glinted in the fading light. "Been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Willow's breath caught as she recognized a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age. "Xavier." "It was my mother's," he explained. "Only thing of value I've kept all these years." His eyes never left hers as he continued. Willow Oak, I love you. Will you marry me, bleed with me, build a life with me here in Copper Canyon or wherever else our path might lead? Tears sprang to Willow's eyes, but they were tears of joy. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Xavier, I will. The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been made for her. Xavier pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of shared joys and sorrows, triumphs and struggles, a life fully lived together. Their wedding took place on Christmas Eve in the small church, decorated with pine boughs and candles for the holiday. The entire town attended, the schoolchildren singing carols as Willow walked down the aisle to where Xavier waited, tall and handsome in a new suit. Pastor Reynolds spoke of love and commitment, of building foundations that would withstand life's storms. As Willow and Xavier exchanged vows, their eyes held the memory of words spoken in a desolate canyon when death seemed near and truth was the only currency that mattered. Love makes you bleed, Xavier had said. Then let's bleed together, Willow had answered. And so they would, through the years of building their life in Copper Canyon, through the birth of their children, through hardships and joys yet unimagined. Together, they would face whatever came, stronger for having found each other on the wild frontier where only the bravest hearts survived. 5 years later, on a warm spring evening, Willow sat on the porch of their small house near the schoolhouse, watching Xavier teach their 3-year-old son to ride a gentle pony in the yard. Their infant daughter slept in her cradle nearby, her tiny features a perfect blend of her parents. Copper Canyon had grown in those years, the mine expanding, new families arriving to build homes and businesses. The school now had 2 rooms and another teacher to assist Willow, who divided her time between teaching and motherhood with Xavier's unwavering support. Xavier glanced up, catching Willow's eye as their son squealed with delight atop the pony. His smile, still capable of making her heart race after all this time, spoke volumes. They had found something precious in this remote valley, something neither had dared hope for when they first met on that dusty trail. They had found home. They had found each other. And in the bleeding and healing that love demanded, they had found a strength that could weather any storm. Together, just as they had promised,